Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers. Yes, we are back looking at hidden gems for the one and only PlayStation 1. This time round we are on the letter O, and I'll be honest, this was a quite tough letter as there's surprisingly few games starting with the letter O. There are quite a lot of Japanese exclusive RPGs that I tried to include, but the language barrier there was just too much and I couldn't get far enough to really see what they were like. But having said that, I still have 10 games starting with the letter O to show you. So how about I shut up, you press that subscribe button, and we take a look at some games. First up is O.D.T, which stands for Or Die Trying. This is a third-person action-adventure game where you choose from one of 5 characters, who of course each have their own stats to do with strength, armor, speed, weapon prowess, and even magic, or spirit in the case of the game here. The story goes that you're a bunch of ragtag ruffian pirate types, but aren't actually that bad, and your hover ship thing crash lands on a strange alien land. You have limited supplies, including oxygen, and you need to find parts to repair your ship so you can escape, or die trying. Once you've chosen your character, you'll be exploring a pretty huge, extremely dangerous, quite open world, where you'll need to fight off monsters while finding what you need to survive. Getting around the world is decent, but it takes a while to get used to. Each area is only small, but often has multiple exits leading to different areas, and you'll need to do a lot of exploring here. There are arrows on each of the exits, which is handy as it means you can explore each part that you're in without accidentally crossing into the next one. There's plenty of enemies in the levels too, with ugly lizard men, aliens, and strange bat-like creatures that are all out for blood and want to generally make your life a misery. Controlling your character is a bit hit and miss. It is pretty stiff, but thankfully you aren't useless, being able to run, jump and climb all over the place. Something I could never get used to was climbing down things though. I would just sort of fall off and hammer the grab button and hope for the best. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. This is particularly dangerous as you only get a few lives before it's back to the start of the game. Thankfully, there are semi-regular checkpoints, and in fact there are save stations dotted around, so you actually don't need to start from the beginning. I was lying to you. The combat here can be tough. You do have a few weapons that you mostly start the game with, and you pick up different colour ammo, each being used for different weapon types. This is partly where your character stats come in, as some collect more than others, and some use less than others. You definitely want to use it sparingly though if you can, as ammo can be hard to come across. Thankfully, each character is pretty good with their hands and feet though, and it's more than capable of kicking the crap out of enemies without a gun, though it can be tough as there is no block button and enemies will often ignore your attacks and hit you while you're wailing away on them. I found it best to do a combination of a couple of small shots and then run in and do some hit and run tactics. Platforming and puzzles play a huge part in the game too, and you'll need to explore every inch of every level to find everything you need to progress. There's keys and switches you need to find, and these can be hidden away quite well indeed. Graphically, the game looks okay. It's pretty samey throughout, but the characters and enemies all can animate well enough. But do be warned, this is a bloody hard game. But this is mostly by design, and it really is one of those ones that you have to stick with, and you'll get a little bit further each time. But I did find that I was looking forward to trying again, and when I did get a bit further, it was incredibly satisfying. If you've got the cojones, then I would recommend giving this one a try. Fighting game time now with One Piece Grand Battle 2. This is based on the anime that I have no interest in, but that doesn't mean it won't be a good game. And in fact, it's actually pretty fun. There is a story, but it's all in Japanese, as I don't think this ever left there, but I assume that everyone is a mixture of friends and enemies, and there's a tenuous reason for them all to have a fight. It plays quite a lot like the Smash games, but not quite. This is mainly as it's very simple, with just 2 attack buttons, a jump button and a block button. Your attacks are all different depending on the direction you're holding when you attack. You also have massive specials that are done by building up the meter next to your life. Unlike Smash, here you get traditional life bars. The fights are all one-on-one and last just 1 round, but they're long enough that this doesn't really matter. Between fights there are bits of story, and you can usually choose your opponent from 2 characters, which is cool, as it means you won't always have to fight the same people in the same order. Each one of the characters controls well enough, though it is pretty stiff, and there are noticeable gaps between making your attacks and being able to move again. However, it is still perfectly playable and actually pretty damn fun. Items appear all over the place that can restore your health or give you stat boosts for short times, or sometimes there's something you can use to smash your opponent over the head with. The graphics here are pretty cool and I really like the cartoon style. The animation is decent and the super moves all look really good, with each character having a number of unique ones to use. I'm assuming that if you're a fan of the show there'll be callbacks to something that happened there, but I'll never know. I also really like the music here. It's not something I'd listen to outside of the game, but it really suits it, and I'm guessing it's also probably from the show. Another plus here is that there's a ton of characters to unlock, about 10 or so, which is done by completing the game with different characters, so you're encouraged to experiment and not use the same one the whole time like a basic bitch. Overall, this is a quite basic fighter, and it is a little rough around the edges, but it's good where it counts, and while I would have preferred it to be up to 4 players, it is just as fun with 2 and well worth a look, especially if you're a fan of the show, I guess. Omega Assault is one of those generic sounding games that is, in fact, generic in just about every way, but it was clearly a budget game, so it can be forgiven. You get very little in the way of, well, just about anything here. There's no intro or story, there's barely even a title screen, but from the looks of it, evil mechs are attacking, so you gotta get rid. This is a very basic rail shooter, though actually it's more of a gallery shooter. You just control the cursor on the screen by pointing it at the enemies and press the attack button. You've actually got 3 weapons you can use. You've got a machine gun that has unlimited ammo but is pretty weak. There's a laser gun that's quite powerful but quickly overheats and takes a while to cool down. And then there's the rockets, which are devastating, but you can only use them a handful of times on each level. And each level does play the same. You're in various cities and waves of robots will appear. All you have to do is shoot them all and you move on to the next. Do this for about an hour and you beat the game. The controls here are fine. I mean, it's just moving a cursor. Thankfully, they didn't manage to mess that up too badly. You can also move up, down, left and right a bit, and you'll need to do this to avoid enemy attacks, and you see the sneaky ones that are off screen. Enemies will also sometimes drop power-ups like points or health. You'll need to shoot these in order to collect them, as like most games like this. Graphically, the game is okay. It's basic, but it does the job. Something I don't like is the massive red blob in the middle of the screen that serves absolutely no purpose at all. It just confuses things. There's times where I'd forget that that's not where I'm supposed to be aiming, and I forgot about the green cursor, which is the one you want to pay attention to and actually control. Also, the amount of stuff on your HUD is just stupid, and it's literally there for show. It's just a graphic. None of it is animated or even does anything. It's literally just there to fill up space. There's also no music here at all, and the sounds are basically what you'd expect. Alarms, bullets and explosions. The thing is that this is exactly what you should expect from a budget game. It doesn't do anything that will blow your mind, but at the same time it's actually not a bad game. It's perfectly playable, and it's fine as a mindless shooter that you can beat in about an hour. If you like arcade style shooters, to be honest, this will probably entertain you for long enough. If you need more Omega in your life and you can't find any fish, then maybe check out Omega Boost. This is a third-person rail shooter where you play as a big old mech flying through space and across the surface of a number of planets, and you'll be taking down other mechs, robots and strange creatures that are probably just trying to defend themselves. The action here is fast and frantic, and more importantly, really good fun. Depending on the level, you have different amounts of freedom. Sometimes you're able to fly anywhere you like on a stage, though really you do have to stick to one path. Other times, you really do have to go forward and just take out anything and anyone in your way. Thankfully, the game gives you a decent radar that's a lot of help, showing where enemies are. And there's plenty of them. You'll be bombarded on just about every level, but thankfully you're pretty good at looking after yourself, and you have a few weapons of your own to take down the bastards trying to ruin your day. You've got a laser with unlimited ammo. In fact, everything you have has unlimited ammo. The laser is pretty powerful and fires quickly when you hammer the button, but really what you want to do is hold the button down so you can use your lock-on attack. This is similar to games like Panzer Dragoon. You can lock onto loads of enemies at once and it does a decent amount of damage. It's especially good against bosses, which are large and take a ton of hits. Thankfully they do have life bars, so you always know if you're actually doing anything against them. Graphically, the game is really good. There's always a ton going on, and the characters and enemies all look great, if a bit generic. The action is fast and frantic with constant smooth gameplay and controls, making it loads of fun to play. The controls themselves work well and are responsive. They're pretty simple, and you'll be doing 180s and barrel rolls to avoid enemy shots in no time. Also, the soundtrack here is awesome and gives the game a really decent atmosphere. Overall, it's just a fun game to play, and it does a lot of things right. It has a crap generic name, but it's a great game and well worth playing. Off-World Interceptor is a strange game, as it's a driving game, but it's also more similar to a rail shooter, as once you start moving forward you can never go back, and you can only rotate the screen left or right. The story is that you're one of a bunch of interceptors, who are basically cloned bounty hunters. You're hired to get the same target, so you have to race and destroy each other to be the first one to get the bounty. The story, which is very flimsy, is told through some excellent live-action cutscenes, which are suitably terrible and actually done like the old Mystery Science Theatre stuff, with there being an audience watching the cutscenes and taking the piss out of them. It's actually quite funny. Gameplay-wise, you'll be driving your vehicle through a bunch of barren worlds that do actually have a fair few hazards, enemies and pickups in them, so I guess they aren't that barren. You'll need to avoid things like rocks, buildings and vegetation while collecting money, power-ups and extra weapons and health. You have to make it to the designated spot in one piece, and then you move on to the next stage, and eventually a pretty large boss. There are indicators at the top of the screen that let you know how far you need to go, as well as if you're in the lead. There's a ton of rival vehicles and they can easily be quite aggressive, but thankfully your weapons are decent and are very good at taking them out. Also, between levels you can upgrade your power, armour and even buy new vehicles. But everything does cost a ton of money, so it takes a while to save up even for basic things, but it is well worth the upgrades. In fact, this game really reminds me of the rock and roll racing games for the 16-bit consoles, but it's nothing to do with those, but if you told me it's a sequel, I probably would have believed you. As mentioned before, even though this is a driving game, you can only move forward, left or right, which does really feel strange at first, but once you're used to it, it's a lot of fun. It's annoying at times not being able to go back and get the item that you just missed by inches, and they're often placed in a way that you have to choose which item you really want to get first. Graphically, I think the game looks really good. It's all pre-rendered cards on 3D worlds, and I have a real soft spot for this sort of thing. All the vehicles look excellent, and the worlds are all varied. The draw distance isn't the best, but it's enough, and you do get a radar showing upcoming power-ups and enemies, which is nice. I also really like the music here. There's some cool themes that fit the action. The controls are decent, if a little twitchy, especially when going uphill, but it's easy to get used to, and you'll be collecting items and shooting enemies in no time. If you're a fan of arcade-style games, this is a great one to play. I thought it was going to be a bit crappy, but I really enjoyed my time with it. Back to Japan now for Odo Odo Oddity. The story here is kinda confusing as it's all in Japanese, but as far as I can tell, you're a bunch of weird, freaky kid things and you find a not so violent version of the Necronomicon. The book sucks you in and all you have are some balloons and a wand to survive. It's another rail shooter, sorry I didn't realise there'd be so many in this video, and you have 3 balloons attached to you. As they are balloons, you're constantly falling down, but you can use the D-pad to move in all directions, so you can make yourself fly back up, but you've got to look out for momentum. Also, you've got to watch out for the wind, as some of the levels get quite blowy and will play havoc with your controls, forcing you to change your tactics as a ton of enemies will come at you, and often you lose control of your character as the wind decides to screw you over just at the wrong time. There's loads of enemies here, and some of them will fire things at you, some just fly towards you, and as well as this, you've got to avoid any scenery. If anything touches you, you lose a balloon. Lose all 3 and it's back to the start of the level for you. You do have a wand you can use to smash enemies in the face with to kill them, but this is hard to use, and it's actually quite difficult to judge the distance of where enemies actually are. The game is kind of generous with the hit detection, but I did actually tend to avoid attacking where I could, as most of the time it wouldn't end well for me. Also, you can only swing your wand a limited number of times. You'll need to collect the medallion things that you find on the levels to use it more. These act as your ammo. You also have a boost that you can use to help dodge things, and this also uses medallion power, which kinda sucks, but you do quickly learn to use them sparingly. You can get extra balloons, but they are rare, and it is annoying, as if you die, or really when you die, you'll go back to the start of the level, which is pretty long, and there's no checkpoints, and you do move pretty damn slowly. You can start from the beginning of any world that you've completed though, but lose all your lives, and you've got to start from the beginning of that world every time. Though this is one of those games that has that just one more try appeal to it, and I did get a little further each time. Graphically, the game is good, using sprites for everything. It all moves smoothly, if a bit slow, and the enemy designs are all pretty cool. In fact, I do really like that everything is bright and colourful, and that always gets a thumbs up from me. The controls are good, but a little stiff. If you do play the game, the top tip is that you can actually double tap the direction to get a small boost in that way. This is essential to dodging and collecting items. In fact, collecting items is a bit of a drag though, as the collision detection is pretty crap, and there's times where you swear you get an item, but you don't. But the game is still perfectly playable, and although it's really tough, much harder than I thought, it was enjoyable and kept me coming back. It does feel like there should be a projectile attack in here, and it did take a bit of time to get used to, but overall this is a fun, different take on the genre. Here is One, a third-person action game where you take control of a gruff-voiced bloke who's been experimented on, but then he escapes, armed to the teeth, and goes on a mission to take down the evil corporation that made him the awesome killing machine that he is. What an ungrateful bastard. You'll be running around and gunning through bases, cities, mountain ranges, and more, and while you're doing this, there's a hell of a lot of stuff for you to blow up. Destroying things leaves behind weapons, points, shields and lives, which are always handy. Your main weapon is a pretty powerful laser blaster, and what's cool is that the more stuff you blow up or kill, the more powerful it becomes, firing faster and with a better range. Every time you get shot, however, it loses power, and if you get shot too much without killing or blowing something up, then you'll die. But to be honest, this doesn't happen that often. You do also get other weapons like rockets, homing missiles and a flamethrower, but these have limited ammo, though it won't stop you from going mental with them, as every weapon here is really fun to use and they do a ton of damage. And it's just as well, as there's a ton of enemies all over the place, in the form of enemy soldiers, helicopters, tanks and other various robot looking things. To be fair, none of them are that hard to kill, and this often includes the bosses. Your main enemy here is likely to be the platforming, which can be really tough, though this is mainly down to the fixed camera that is often in the wrong place, not giving you a good view of where you need to go. Pretty much every time I did die is because I fell off something, rather than because I was shot by someone. Thankfully, there are plenty of checkpoints and you do tend to get a fair few lives. Graphically, this game is excellent, with a cool cyberpunk aesthetic to it. The levels are all varied and have a load going on, with things often happening in the background. The weapons and explosions are the real star though, with some really cool effects and very little slowdown or performance issues. The controls are silky smooth and you can run and strafe as well as double jump, and you even have a dodge roll thing, which I didn't really find that handy, but I did use it from time to time. My biggest complaint with the game that isn't camera related is that it's quite short and easy. You'll likely beat the game after just a few attempts, and it's easily done in just a couple of hours. Thankfully, it is a hell of a lot of fun to play, and easily one that you can come back to time and time again when you just want to kill an hour or a few hundred virtual soldiers. What's that? You want a racing game? Well, here you go. It's Option Tuning Car Battle 2, a Japan-only game where you do some of that there racing. All the text is in Japanese, so I can't really tell what's going on most of the time, but the important thing to know is that you can choose from a pretty impressive range of cars and then race on a pretty impressive range of tracks. There are a few options, like doing single races to practice the courses, doing time trials, or races against a single opponent. And of course there's a challenge mode, which is where you need to go in order to unlock even more courses, cars, and of course things to tune up your car with. As you might have guessed from the name of the game, there is a big focus on tweaking your car to make it perform better, and exactly how you like it. In fact, the amount of tinkering you can do is actually pretty damn impressive. You can tune the handling, suspension, grip, tyres, engines, and everything in between. Sadly for me, I know nothing about cars, so I just made it up and hoped for the best. This had varying results, and sometimes I'd be speeding around with some awesome handling, but most of the time I'd have crap acceleration and the car would handle like a U-boat. But then again, for people that know what everything means, and I guess that are able to read Japanese, I'm sure they'd be able to do this much better. Also, as mentioned, you'll unlock better cars with much better stats as well as more parts to use in order to make things better as you play. The racing itself is good, the courses are all quite long and have some tricky twists and turns, and you do get a nice selection of places to race in, though some of them did feel a bit samey. You only ever race one other person at a time, and you can choose who your rival is, though most of them are pretty damn hard to beat no matter who you choose. I was able to win a few races, and clearly tuning up your car is what you need to do if you want to win. Graphically, the game is good, with some decent models, smooth racing, and a pretty impressive draw distance for the system. I did always enjoy seeing what was coming up next. The controls are good, but the turning does take a while to get used to. I feel like this is one of those games that's best played with a steering wheel, as it's more of a sim, but I don't have one of those, so couldn't. And really, that's all there is to it. It's a pretty standard racing sim. Personally, I've always preferred the more arcade-style races, as I just have no interest in tuning up cars. But if you like that sort of business and can navigate the language, this is probably worth a look. If you want horror and survival, then you probably want a survival horror game. This is one called Overblood, and I really like it. The story here is a deliberately confusing one. You play as a bloke who wakes up from some sort of cryo chamber with not much in the way of memories. You know, that old chestnut. It doesn't take long for you to realise that you've been experimented on, and there's all sorts of evil people, monsters and computer systems acting right little shits. Your main prerogative is to get a cure for your strange blood condition that's been inflicted upon you and escape before you're eaten, poisoned or crooned to death. The game is a lot more puzzle and exploration focused than most survival horror games, and there are very few enemies or times where you have to fight. Most of the time here you'll be exploring large areas, looking for items etc. that you need to proceed. You know the drill. You'll meet a lot of cool characters along the way, and what's nice is that you can switch between most of them on the fly and actually play as them, and they all have their own skill sets and need to be used at different times to solve different puzzles. This can be a little tedious though, as it means you have to pretty much interact with every item with every character, and just because it doesn't do anything with one of them, doesn't mean it won't with one of the others. Sometimes you do get clues as to what character you can use it though, and sometimes they'll even make noises or wave their arms around to let you know, which is nice. On the rare occasion that you do need to fight, the controls can be a little clunky. I did wonder if this is why they focused on more puzzles, but it works fine, and you can punch enemies to death most of the time. The graphics here are very good, with decent character models and animation, and the environments all look really good too, with fixed camera angles that do move around a little bit and they help build the tension. But as always, they can also make it hard to know where you need to go and where the actual exits on the screen are. The controls are a bit stiff, and it can be easy to get stuck on the scenery, but this rarely had an impact on the gameplay, other than sometimes making it hard to get to the actual thing you need to interact with. It really is all about the story here, and thankfully it's very good. It's got the usual crappy voice acting, but it's engaging, and I genuinely wanted to see what was going on, which, as Belt Buckle Bill will tell you, is impressive, as I have the attention span and patience of a dead nun's ball bag. And no, I don't know what that means either. I highly recommend playing this game, especially if you're a fan of a slower paced, more puzzle focused mystery. There's a bit of jank, but not that much, and the game is a really interesting one. There's even a sequel, which I haven't played, but if it keeps the standards of this one, then I do want to give it a go. Definitely one for the collection. And finally for today, here is Overboard, a sort of pirate game where you control a pirate ship as you sail the 7 seas, which are more like conveniently made obstacle courses, collecting treasure, blasting the 7 bells of hell out of other ships, traps, turrets and buildings, all in the name of Yar. Each level is a pretty small area, though they can take 20 minutes or so to get through, and they're all packed with all sorts of tricks and traps as well as the enemies. You'll often need to get to the end of each level by finding keys and treasure. A lot of these things are often hidden in secret areas that can be tricky to find. In fact, the game on a whole is surprisingly tricky, but it's a lot of fun to play. There's loads of levels, and finding new weapons and power-ups is always fun, and you'll soon have a ship that's powered up with loads of cannons, boosts and even missiles. But even with this power, you need to be careful, as navigating narrow waterways filled with spinning blades of death, flamethrowers, and not to mention the other ships that I've actually mentioned 3 times, is a lot harder than it looks, but it's always fair. Enemies do a fair bit of damage to you, but there are health packs all over the place and you do get a few checkpoints here and there. As you progress, you'll go from lush beaches to Arctic tundras and some nice looking European towns, exploring the seas and trying to steal all the treasure. The graphics here are very good. There's a lot of great cartoony style here with all sorts of humour, which is always nice. The worlds look different, but the levels do tend to get quite samey quite quickly, which is a bit of a shame. Things do get mixed up a bit though, with a good variety of enemies, and you can even power up your ship so it flies in the air. Also, there's a ton of weapons for you to use, and you'll need to get used to them all if you want to get anywhere. The controls here are really bloody fantastic, with a few attack buttons that use your different weapons, and it's very easy to switch between them all on the go. The game also runs really smoothly, and I never felt like I died as the result of shoddy gameplay. It's all made very well. As you're fighting, you'll sometimes lose a crew member. I'll be honest and say I never really actually knew what the point of this was, but I just made sure to always swing by and pick them up if they did fall off the boat. One of the most fun things about the game though is the multiplayer. You can play a versus mode against a friend, and this is a blast. I don't have any friends, but I did manage to play it a little while back with Belt Buckle Bill, who isn't a friend, he's a lover, and we had a very good time chasing and spanking each other. Then we played the game, which was also enjoyable. If you're looking to hoist a mainsail or two, this is definitely a game you need to check out. So there you go, 10 more hidden gems, this time starting with the letter O. Which one is your favourite? Make sure you let us know in the comments below. On screen now you can see where you can follow us, so why not do so? We've got loads of cool stuff for everyone to enjoy. Now, all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.